So Nvidia, what have you done again? You've made everybody somewhat of an expert on these 12-volt high-power cables that have been giving people all of these melting problems on the RTX 4090. So not to be another expert on the field, because I'm not an expert on these type of matters, today we're going to consult a source that is going to know a little bit more about this. I'm going to read you guys exactly what he wrote. This is going to be Igor's Labs. If you guys are aware, he's going to know a little bit more about this type of stuff, and he actually went a little bit more in depth, and maybe now we can get to the root of the problem that's happening here. We're going to analyze what he said. That way we're going to cut through a lot of the things that you may see on YouTube. Everybody gives their opinion on what may be going on. Everybody's quick to blame Nvidia for this or for that. Let's get to the root cause of the problem so we can see what actually is going on here and if this is actually an issue that we should really be concerned about. So like I've mentioned, Igor from Igor's Labs, he recently posted an article entitled "The Horror Has a Face: Nvidia's Hot 12-Volt High-Power Adapter for the GeForce 4090 with a Built-in Breaking Point." And of course, this article is going to be referring to the recent issues. I'm sure you guys have seen it on Reddit. Somebody posted that their 3090 power connector melted. So this is very concerning. It's a very expensive GPU. There were a couple of examples of this happening, not an extreme amount. Even YouTubers like Jay's 2 Cents, he tried to bend the cable in many directions to replicate the problem. He couldn't do it, at least not with the amount of times that he tried. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly why this is occurring. Some people do think that bending the cable is going to be an issue, but let's see what Igor starts to say so we can get a little bit more of like an expert analysis on what's going on here. So off the bat, this is what he says about the cable itself, or the connector, the 12-volt high-power connector. He says if it's a good quality one and the power supply is good, there's actually nothing wrong with that adapter itself. The problem here is going to be more on the solution, as he said it, that exclusively was provided by Nvidia to the board partners. We also saw some news lately that Nvidia was telling its board partners to return any GPU to the headquarters for analysis that presented any problem like this. This is a little bit unusual. Usually they never do this. So that shows you they're very aware that they may be an issue. They're doing an investigation into seeing exactly what's going on, and they want to see all samples of failed product. But according to Igor Labs, he's blaming the ones that Nvidia provided to the board partners specifically. Let's go on further and see what he says. He also mentions how Nvidia briefed the board partners about this very serious issue. First, he goes on to show us sort of the block diagram of the special Nvidia adapter. Here, he's looking at the upper 6 yellow connections of the connector. That includes the bridge as well. It's going to be all the 12-volt pins. They're connected to each other, and once again to the 4 feeding wires. And then he shows us a little diagram here just so we understand sort of what's going on. Now, remember, the RTX 4090 is putting out the TDP of 450 watts, which is about the same as the 3090 Ti, but these GPUs do have boards that can go all the way up to 600 watts. That is certainly an insane amount of power, and we think if Nvidia really did release GPUs with 600 watts, imagine the problems that we would have then. If we're seeing issues now at 450 watts to 500, whatever the range may be, the issues will certainly be pretty crazy. So they're going to have to engineer some other solution. But anyway, this is the diagram that he shows us here. Then, of course, he shows us a picture of the plug itself. He says it's not the form factor that's an issue, the 12-volt high-power cable, but it's in the plug itself. So according to him, he even says that Nvidia probably didn't even know what kind of contact party the supplier is having inside the molded connector. That's a direct quote from what he said, or else they would have never approved it in this form. So according to him, he says when you remove layer after layer, something gradually emerges that you would have been better off not seeing in the first place. And of course, we have this picture here showing us what's going on. According to him, the problem is a total of 4 thick 4-gauge wires are distributed over a total of 6 contacts, with 2 outer leads soldered to 1 each pin, and then the 2 middle leads soldered to 2 pins each. The solder base is a mere 0.2 millimeter thin copper base with a width of 2 millimeter per incoming wire, which then results in a 4 millimeter per pair for the middle connections. Soldering one or even two wires is very sporty. So this is a solution that's definitely not very good. Even though you can't see it, doesn't mean it's going to be good even if it's out of sight. And then he says lifting off the enveloping layer causes the thin plate to tear immediately, and then you could see bending the cables at the connector in the housing can cause such damage. So the bad contacts, unsafe bridges, the increased resistance as a result of such actions are highly dangerous at these current strengths. So then he shows you how actually bending the cables, especially the way that it's been put together in the not the best fashion as he's demonstrating here, and with a lot of power going through it, a lot of voltage, that can show you how you're going to have the damage that we've been seeing pop up on Reddit. So Igor's point here is that it's going to be a matter of quality and execution, how the adapter and plug are actually done, and not necessarily with the form factor or the adapter itself. He's going to use this to prove a point. He says that, if you're a fan of the connection or not, there are good power supply companies that have done it, and he's measured here. You can see the thermals and the temperature. He's done some analysis here. This is the example that he gives. A functioning connection, for example, the two cables of the new Be Quiet Dark Power Pro 13. According to him, it doesn't do this balancing act with the voltage bridges. It spends each pin on its own individual line. And then he says this is an accurate and clean solution. And he does some testing here showing that there is, a better way to actually do these cables so you don't have these issues. It really comes down to how the actual cable is done. So in the end, he kind of summarizes the answer a little bit more directly. The overall build quality of the included adapter for the GeForce RTX 4090 distributed by Nvidia itself is extremely poor, and the internal construction should never have been approved like this. Nvidia has to take its own supplier to task here and replace the adapters in circulation, which would be the least that they can do. He goes on to summarize, the problem is not the connection itself, nor is it repeated plugging or unplugging. Standard compliant power supply cables from brand manufacturers are not affected by this so far. The current trigger is Nvidia's own adapter to 4X 8-pin in the accessories, whose inferior quality can lead to failures and has already caused damage in single cases. Splitting each of the four 14-gauge leads onto each of the 16 pins in the connector of the adapter by soldering them onto bridges that are much too thin is dangerous because the ends of the leads can break off at the solder joint, such as when it's bent, as we've seen on various examples. Bending or kinking the wires directly of the connector or the adapter puts too much pressure on the solder joints and bridges so that they can break off. The inner bridges between the pins is too thin to compensate for the current flow 2 or 3 instead of 4 connected 12-volt lines. The problem with these connectors melting, it's not due to the standard itself, but due to the quality of the actual adapters provided by Nvidia to the third-party AIB partners. As we can see here, exactly how the cables are constructed, put together, if there's too many things spliced, if everything's not clean and not done really in the proper way. So you're going to have these issues happen anytime the cable is bent or anything like that happens. It's kinked, especially with the size of the RTX 4090. If you try to close your case, most likely in many cases, you're not going to be able to fit the GPU with the panel on. Some cases are very close, causing you to smush that cable up against the glass. Even though it may fit, you're going to be bending that wire even further, perhaps causing these issues on that poorly constructed power adapter. So here we have a pretty good expert analysis of what's going on. You can see that the 12-volt high power connector necessarily isn't the issue. If it's done correctly in a very clean way, you're not going to have these issues. Here is that somebody, the supplier that gave to Nvidia, they skimped on these parts, and it's just not high quality enough to be able to be safely used long term across many RTX 4090s. All right, guys, so what do you think? Seeing this information, does it change your opinion a little bit? I know now you may be thinking, why did Nvidia include these adapters if they're not really the best quality? Other companies seem to be providing better quality adapters, like CableMod is coming out with some cables that probably are going to be much better, which much better construction, as well as power supplies like Be Quiet. So we're going to see what happens. Is Nvidia going to issue a recall? That's going to be some pretty big news if it happens, but I think they have to replace these cables somehow. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.